Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the talk this evening. I'm come in a personal capacity, and some of the opinions I'm going to give this evening are my own and don't reflect necessarily what Cambridge Sustainable Food has as their policy. But I will be giving one or two plugs for Cambridge Sustainable Food, so I hope you forgive me. Right, where do we start? A better future for food. The talk is going to be in three parts. First of all, where are we now and what are the problems? Then look at where would we like to get to, what are we aiming for? And last of all, the strategies which we might be able to use to help us achieve it. So, just a few basic facts to start with. Food is important to everybody. Pancake Tuesday is part of that culture of food. We love making food, we love sharing food. It's been part of all cultures right way back. So food has more than just a nutritious effect. It also has a social importance in our lives. But the food we have now, we live in a time of, in the Western world, food plenty, apparently. Supermarkets full of all sorts of things you can find. But the agriculture system is responsible for 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is an enormous amount. A quarter of greenhouse gas emissions globally are caused by agriculture and the production of food. And livestock have a significant part to play in that. Use of water. We have plenty of rain in most of the UK, but there are various places in the world where water is a real problem, and the demands for growing food in such places can cause real problems for the water supply. The way we're using the land, again globally, deforestation, large farms, monoculture, is having a negative impact on biodiversity. And as well as being in a climate crisis, we're also now in a nature crisis. So many species are becoming extinct. We're losing that ecosystem, which is so important. And the most important thing for our food is soil. We can't grow much food without soil. 1/3 of the world arable soil is degraded, and in the UK, the Soil Association reckon we've got less than 100 harvests left. Just putting on the chemical fertilizers is not sustaining the soil, which is a living structure. We have a love of meat. Our diet is very rich in meat. Unfortunately, to produce the amount of meat that the Western world desires, conditions for animal welfare are not good. It's not only the welfare of the animals, it's also the treatment in terms of nutrition. Such things as routine antibiotic use and growth hormones around the world have a negative impact on human health. And then apart from the environment, there's the other aspects of this global food system. Food security. We're concentrating on the UK tonight because it's too big a subject to go worldwide. We currently import at least 50% of our food, and 30% of that is from the EU. Now, with the changing patterns of trade, leaving the EU, our own food security could be compromised if trade deals aren't achieved. There's an issue of land ownership and the ethics of food production. Land ownership around the world is contentious. There's been land grabs, people from one country purchasing land in another country so they can feed their own populations. And the conditions of work of lots of people who produce the food for us is less than ideal. Even in our country, we've had incidents of slavery, people working on some of our farms in appalling conditions. Unfortunately, all the effort that goes into creating the food for us, we waste up to 30% of it. And an awful lot of that is household waste. So we put all this effort into creating the food, and then so much of it is thrown away. A lot of people say that we need to produce more food because we've got population growth, and we'll never be able to feed the world unless we go in for more intensive food production. The food waste which we create is enough to feed 2 billion people. When you say 30%, that's enough for 2 billion people. And we do produce enough food in the world to feed everybody. The problem is that it's unfairly distributed. And even in the UK, although it looks as though we're a land of plenty, we have an incredible inequality of access to food. Sustain in November last year, and this was figures before the pandemic, estimated that 8.4 million people in the UK were suffering some form of food poverty, not being able to access enough healthy food for their families, which is an incredible figure. Alongside that, as well as the people who can't access food readily, we're suffering from record levels of obesity and the poor health associated with that. It's almost doubled in the past 20 years. So we have an unhealthy system. It's the system itself, the way we eat food, and the impact on our health as well as the environment. And then I just put one or two figures together just out of interest. 4 companies are actually responsible for 70% of the global agrochemical business. And 1% of farms operate 70% of the world's farmland. I think that shows how big food, the big corporations are actually in control of so much of the global food production. And of agricultural land, if you look down to the pink and green on the screen, 77% of agricultural land is currently used for meat and dairy. It's not necessarily the animals that are grazing that land, but the land that's taken up with producing food for those animals. So that's just a very quick summary of the problems. But I think it's important to think, where do we want to get to? And there's a lovely quote from James Rebanks, who wrote Pastoral England. It was on the radio a little while ago. He said, healthy ecosystems producing healthy food that is produced in as natural a way as possible. And I thought that summed it up very nicely. Sustain on their website say, good food for all. Everyone has a right to healthy and affordable food. And I would add to that, part of that is reconnecting people to growing and understanding where their food comes from. At the moment, I think an awful lot of people are divorced from the origins of their food. They see it as packaged, and they don't have any input into either the growing or seeing how things are grown. Right. So, how do we solve it? So I've got a lot of questions, I'm afraid. I haven't got all the answers, but it's questions. And the first thing that people come up with, well, we're in a technological age, so technology is there. They'll solve all the problems for us. We don't have to worry. So the picture there is of lab-grown meat. Does that have a role to play? Should we be trying to create food out of algae and fungi of various kinds? Is there a role for some kind of genetic modification of crops in order to produce specific nutrients? I think there's a lot of questions that need answering, and I'm afraid I haven't got an answer for all of them. Again, from the technological responses, what about alternative food for animals and people? Do we just have to stay looking at the box of the things which we always eat? And this is a photograph of it's a local firm called Better Origin, and it's a startup which is producing fly larvae, maggots and grubs for feeding chickens. And what they've done is they've established something where a farmer can have a little unit on site where the grubs are produced on site and feed it to the chickens, and apparently they love it. There's also using insects and grubs for human food. So do we have to look at alternatives? Should we be looking at different ways of farming that don't depend on the soil? When I started looking at this, and I knew that there were a lot of intensively grown vegetables that can be done in a cellar. Now we've got LED lighting, it's a lot cheaper to do, and you can grow quite a lot in a very urban environment without necessity of soil. And when I looked at it, the number of firms who are creating the structures that people can do indicate to me that this is a way which quite a lot of people are looking towards going. Is it wrong to have any kind of factory farming? Is it perhaps our worries about factory farming are because they tend to be controlled by big corporations rather than being local initiatives? That's a question that perhaps we need to think about. The other factor is that in a lot of these things, the problems are so big that sometimes we feel that we can't do anything about it. We're just little people. The choices we make aren't going to have any difference. Surely it needs governments and policymakers to make the changes that are necessary. Well, I think perhaps we can do something. I'll come back to that later. But what's interesting is how the voices that have been raised and the concerns that have been raised are beginning to have an impact. Now, first of all, there's the issue of trade deals post-Brexit. And like Jeremy Persglove a couple of weeks ago, I voted to remain in the EU, but actually coming out and moving away from the EU agricultural policy could be a very valuable opportunity for us to make our own way and to make our own decisions about how we farm. There's an agriculture bill going through Parliament sometime this year, and one of the proposals in that is that farmers should be given subsidies for returning some of the land to nature and for more sustainable practices, rather than simply the amount of land that they have. I'm not sure how effective it will be. I'm not sure whether it's going to be enough, but at least it's a step in the right direction. The National Food Strategy, which has produced a report at the end of last year, what's significant about that is it picks up so much of the inequality, and the key leading recommendations are all about, for example, extending free school meals, enabling more people to have access to good, healthy food. The other review that Hilary mentioned last week, the Dasgupta review, is about making natural capital part of something that we take into our accounting procedures and systems. It's recognizing that the natural world is a finite resource and we need to protect it. But that's controversial too, and a lot of people have, although some people, David Attenborough included, have said this is a wonderful way of looking at the world, there's an awful lot of other people, George Monbiot, for example, who says what it's actually doing is commodifying nature. Do we want to commodify the natural world and have it as part of the bigger economic system? So those are the government parts. There's also a lot of reports coming out which look at the system from other players. And this is the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission's report, Farming for Change, where they actually state that in their modelling system, agroecology or regenerative agriculture, where there is space for wildlife and back to systems like crop rotation and a healthier way of farming, we could actually feed ourselves if we operate that sort of system. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. One of the things they suggest is that if we do go to that sort of system, but keep a lot of the animals, which are part of our history, if you like, our pastures, we would save about 38% on our greenhouse gas emissions. Is that enough? Do we need to be much more radical there and go for something which is far wilder in our countryside and create our food in more intensive ways, for example, the vertical farming in urban situations? Right, so that's the central aspect. And then the other thing which happens is we are all being asked to change our diets, not only for health reasons, but for climate change. And I've been talking to people now for a good number of years. And when it was suggested about 6 years ago that perhaps we ought to eat a little bit less meat, people looked at me with a sheer, what? What are you talking about? Why not? Meat's good for us. Now, last year, talking to people, of course I've got to eat less meat. It's one of the first things. Or if you say to people, what sort of dietary changes do you think would help? Less meat. It's the first thing that comes up. So public perceptions have shifted. Maybe we could go beyond that. I've a lovely little picture there of crunchy critters, alternative protein sources. There's the question of vegan or not vegan. And I know people have very strong views one way or the other. My personal view is that animals and livestock are part of a food system. They produce manure, they churn up the ground, they sometimes eat what we can't eat. So they could be an integral part, and I think, I personally don't think it's necessarily wrong to eat animals who have had a good life, been well reared and well looked after. And the last one is local and seasonal. Should we be looking at local food more than any other food? Is that the best way of producing it? It's a mantra now that people keep saying, yes, buy local, buy seasonal. But maybe we ought to look outside the box there too. We certainly need to support our local farmers and our growers around our city, but what else should we be doing in making our individual choices? Right, so from big government, individual choices, we now come down to community. And I just want to look at one or two of the things that are already happening. If you look at what's going on in Cambridge, there is an incredible range of initiatives, startups, groups getting together. The picture here is of Co-Farm, which started up last year. It's a piece of land which was empty, very near Cambridge Airport, and Co-Farm's been started by somebody called Gavin Shelton. And what he wanted to do was to create a space where local people could come and help in food production, to get reconnected to the food supply, to produce food for the local community. And he says, our focus is on making access to local, organically grown, seasonal food universal. If organic and local remains the preserve of people who can afford to pay a 30 to 50% premium for it, we will never become mainstream, and so our food system will never be sustainable. And what he hopes is that his organisation will start to create these small urban farms in cities around the UK to try and involve more people in food production. There's Transition Crop Share, which has been going now for, I think, 10 years or more, where volunteers go and help at Waterland Organics and help produce the crop, and then there's an element of sharing, and there is a veg box scheme associated with it as well. There are community gardens in Cambridge, active community gardens. There are community orchards. There are active allotment societies, and there are grow your own projects. So all these things are going on, connecting people to their food in a practical way. Cambridge Sustainable Food this year are having a project called Grow a Row, where they're asking people to grow a row of something to be contributed towards a food sharing scheme for people who don't have access to good food. There are initiatives for redistribution of surplus food. The obvious one that comes to mind is food banks, where people are referred, and it's mostly donations which are given out to people who cannot access good food. The picture on the left is the Christmas hampers that Cambridge Sustainable Food, in alliance with the council and city council workers and Fair Share and food banks, put together for people at Christmas to redistribute some food. And it was a way of getting a lot of local businesses involved in redistributing some of their food as well. There are several community fridges in Cambridge now, where again people can, or could until the lockdown, until the pandemic, could take things which they had grown or things which are surplus, put in. People could come and help themselves from the fridges. Again, a way of sharing out what we have so there's more equality of access. There are a lot of ways of supporting local growers and small food enterprises. We've got at least 2 veg box schemes in the city. There are others, there are national ones as well. We've got a food hub which is emerging, which is part of its role is to link local suppliers to a market rather than being tied into the big supermarket contracts. They can actually have a local market within the city. And the aim of that is to create a vibrant food economy so that it's active, it's growing, lots of people are engaged in it, lots of people are involved, and the people who grow our food for us locally have good markets for what they produce. So all of this going on, lots of people working, and I haven't mentioned an awful lot of initiatives happening. If we could only join these together, create some way of mutually supporting. And during the pandemic, the redistribution of surplus food involved creating a distribution hub and then creating mini hubs so that the food was gathered together and then sent out to the smaller hubs so that people could come and collect, or it could be given out to people. It created quite a community of people who were involved in donating. It raised awareness in local businesses. And there's a hope that those mini hubs could stay as part of an infrastructure so that there are local places where people can go, not only collect food, but also they can become centres of energy and skill building so that people can have more access to how do we make the best use of our food? How can we feed our children more healthily? So you get a community engagement within these small hubs. And these are some quotes from the Cambridge Sustainable Food website, which is what Cambridge Sustainable Food is aiming through this. Grassroots energy, innovation and action are the engine of positive change. And it's vital that individuals and communities can build the knowledge, skills, resources and projects to make that change happen. And if we can do that, it will be better for the local economy, for businesses, for jobs, as well as for the climate and the soil and nature around us. And the more people who can be involved in that and aware of it, the more we can begin to create a positive food culture. Now, this is my plug for Cambridge Sustainable Food. Already we're working with lots of the key players in the local food system. We're working closely with the local council too, who have been very supportive, and we have achieved in the Sustainable Food Places scheme of things a bronze award for our city. We are on the way to achieving silver, and our next step will be to go for gold. And the key factor of going for a gold award is to make a really good, active, energetic, creative, innovative, good food movement in the city. And I think if we can do that, then we will be able to transform our local system, but also have a real impact. If this happens across the country, it's a real impact on those who make the policy up at the top. So not only do we empower ourselves, but we empower the capacity for making further changes. So the power of community is part of building a good food movement. The final question before I finish We're working within a system where the major supermarkets, is it 4 major supermarkets, control 65% of the food purchases in our country. What do we do about that? Can we work with these big food players? Can we transform them, or do we have to sideline them and work around them and hope that they will pick up the message? Messages are getting through. I've noticed a lot more adverts on television now which talk about making choices which are more sustainable. Sustainable's become a very strong buzzword in food adverts. Vegan food has become very popular. The recognition that we should be eating less meat is there. But is that greenwashing? Or is there a capacity for real change? So I think that's my final question. We can make the change if everybody works together, and if we can create a really good food movement in Cambridge, it will have a significant impact. Thank you very much for listening.